She didn't look like someone who was going to live past noon. The summer sun of El 1877 burned straight down on the hard ground outside Mesilla, New Mexico territory, and the young woman lying there looked like she'd already been forgotten by the world. Her dress was torn, soaked with dust and dried blood, clinging to her skin like it refused to let her go. One leg was twisted at an ugly angle, wrapped tight in a filthy strip of cloth that had long since stopped doing any good. Her lips were cracked, her face streaked with grime, and her eyes fluttered open only long enough to beg the sky for mercy that never came. Most folks would have ridden past out here. People learned early not to stop for trouble. Trouble had a way of sticking to a man, following him home, burning down everything he'd spent a lifetime building. But Silas McCrae didn't ride past. At 55, Silas had seen enough summers to know the difference between a drunk sleeping it off and a soul hanging by a thread. He reined in his horse, the leather creaking under his weight, and studied the scene the way a rancher studies a dying steer. Careful, quiet, already counting the cost. The woman tried to push herself up when she heard him dismount. Her arm shook so hard it barely obeyed her. Pain flashed across her face, sharp and helpless, and she collapsed back into the dirt with a sound that wasn't quite a cry and wasn't quite a breath. Silas knelt beside her, keeping his distance at first. He'd learned that lesson young. He'd also learned another lesson, the kind you don't read in a book. If a body is left out here too long, the land starts to claim it. The flies find you first, then the ants, then the birds that circle high and quiet, like they already own your name. Silas glanced up and saw two dark shapes drifting far off, slow and patient. They were not in a hurry. That was what scared him. He looked back at the girl and noticed something else that did not belong. No canteen, no bedroll, no bag, no horse, anywhere nearby. In this country, a person does not simply end up alone unless someone worked hard to make it that way. Silas shifted so his shadow covered her face, not to be kind, but to give her a little shade and keep her eyes open long enough to answer. Then he looked at the ground. There were scuffs where boots had dragged, and one clean print that stood out, pressed deep like the man wearing it was heavy and unbothered. Silas did not like that print. It looked like the kind of print that comes from a man who thinks he is untouchable, and that meant this girl was not just hurt. She was being managed. He did not say any of it out loud. He just made one decision, the kind that changes a life before you realize it. He moved his horse a few steps to block the view from the road. Then he knelt again, calm on the outside and ready on the inside. "Easy now," he said, his voice low, steady, the kind that didn't waste words. Her eyes found his hat, then his face. She swallowed, throat dry, chest rising too fast. For a moment she looked like she wanted to say a dozen things and couldn't afford the strength for even one. Then she whispered it. "Please take them off." The words barely carried in the heat, not a demand, not embarrassment, just pain. Silas followed her gaze to the strip of cloth wrapped around her leg. It was dark with old blood and dust, tied so tight it had started to cut into the flesh beneath. Every shallow breath pulled the fabric tighter, dragging against the wound. He hesitated. "Out here, you didn't touch a woman you didn't know. Not unless she asked. Not unless there was no other choice." She winced, teeth clenched, and tried to sit up again, the effort nearly breaking her. "That cloth's killing me," she said, voice cracking. "Please." Silas sighed, a slow breath that carried years with it. He poured a little water into her mouth, waited until her breathing slowed, then reached for the knot. "I'm going to be gentle," he said. "I promise." He worked the knot, loose one careful inch at a time. The fabric resisted, stuck fast where blood had dried and dirt had settled. She cried out once, a sharp sound, then bit down on it, shaking. When the cloth finally came away, Silas stopped moving. He went so still it looked like the whole desert had told him to hold its breath. For a long moment, he forgot the heat, forgot the flies, forgot the open land stretching out behind him. What stared back at him wasn't just a wound. There was a mark there, pressed into her skin near the edge of the injury. Not fresh, not accidental. A crude brand shape, the kind used on cattle, raw at the edges and angry red. Deliberate. Personal. Silas felt his stomach tighten. No outlaw did that. No drifter either. That mark belonged to a business. To men who moved herds, signed papers, and buried problems where no one would look twice. As he lifted the last fold of cloth, something else slid free and fell into his palm. A small scrap of paper, stiff with dried blood, creased like it had been hidden in a hurry. He unfolded it just enough to see numbers, short lines, abbreviations a rancher would recognize anywhere. His jaw set. This wasn't an accident on a lonely stretch of land. This wasn't a woman who'd fallen off a horse and been unlucky. This was a message. The woman watched his face, fear sharpening her eyes when she saw the change in him. "They're not done," she whispered. "They won't let me go." Silas wrapped the wound again, cleaner this time, looser. The way it should have been done from the start. He kept his hand steady even as his thoughts raced. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clara," she said. "Clara Whitfield." He nodded once, like he was fixing that name into the ground. "My name's Silas. I've got a place by the river. You'll live through today if we get you there." She closed her eyes, relief washing over her face, so fast it scared him. Trust came easy to people who'd run out of strength. As he lifted her carefully and set her on his horse, Silas looked back at the empty stretch of land behind them, at the road leading into Messia, at the long shadows beginning to form in the heat. He already knew the truth, even if he didn't know the whole story yet. Whoever did this to her wasn't finished, and if he carried her away, they'd come looking. The question wasn't whether trouble would follow him home. The question was whether a tired old rancher had just made a choice that would cost him everything he had left. Silas did not head straight for town. That alone said more about him than any long speech ever could. He took Clara the long way, cutting down toward the bend of the Rio Grande, where cottonwoods grew close enough to throw real shade. The horse moved slow, careful, like it understood the weight it carried was more than flesh and bone. Clara leaned against the saddle, her breathing shallow but steadier than before. Silas kept one hand on the reins and one eye on the open land. Out here, you learn to listen with your skin. The wind, the insects, the quiet that came too fast or lasted too long. He did not talk much. Men his age learned that words were easy to waste and hard to take back. When they reached the small shack by the river, the kind of place most folks never noticed, Silas eased Clara down and settled her onto a bed of old blankets. Nothing fancy, just clean enough. He boiled water, rinsed his hands, worked slow. The wound was angry but not hopeless. That mattered. Clara drifted in and out, catching pieces of the world like a man catching a tune through a closed door. At one point she tried to sit up again, stubborn even now, and Silas gently pushed her back down. "You're safe for the moment," he said. Moments are all any of us ever get. That earned him a weak half-smile. Time passed the way it always did in the heat. Long, sticky, measured by the sound of cicadas and the slow roll of the river. When Clara finally spoke again, it was quieter. Not panicked, just tired. "I didn't mean to drag you into this," she said. Silas shrugged as he tied fresh cloth around the wound. "Didn't ask for the weather either," he replied. "Still shows up." She let out a soft breath that might have been a laugh, if she'd had the strength. Little by little, the truth came out. Not in a rush. Not like a confession, just pieces laid on the table when the silence grew heavy. Her name was Clara Whitfield. She had taught school when there was a school to teach at. When that dried up, she took work helping with records at a shipping yard outside Messia. It was meant to be temporary. Everything dangerous always is. She noticed numbers that did not line up. Cattle counted twice. Loads moved that never showed up where they were supposed to. She asked a question she should not have asked. That was when the friendly looks changed. That was when someone decided it was easier to scare than fix the books. Silas listened without interrupting. He'd seen this kind of thing before, dressed up in different clothes. "What about the paper?" he asked finally, nodding toward the scrap he had folded and tucked away. Her eyes flicked to it, fear tightening her jaw. "There's more," she said. "A lot more. I hid it." That got his full attention. She told him about the box, an old tin tucked away near Fort Selden, close to where Wetton stopped, and nobody looked twice at another piece of junk. It held names, roads, proof enough to ruin the wrong people. Silas exhaled slowly. Fort Selden meant trouble. Not the kind that jumped out of the bushes, but the kind that smiled and shook your hand. He stepped outside for a moment, letting the river air cool his thoughts. The land stretched quiet and wide, but he knew better than to trust it. When he rode back into Messia for supplies, he felt the change before he saw it. Looks lingered too long. Voices dropped when he passed. Deputy Tom Rudd met him near the store. Friendly as a church picnic, he asked questions too many. About a girl. About injuries. About wit. Silas had been riding that morning. Silas answered just enough to be polite, and no more. Rudd kept smiling, but his eyes kept measuring. Silas had seen that look in men who played cards for a living. They laugh, they joke, and all the while they are counting what you have in your pocket. Silas turned to leave, and he felt it. Footsteps behind him that matched his pace a little too well. Not close enough to be obvious, close enough to be a warning. He did not turn around. He stopped at a water barrel instead, dipped his hands like he had nowhere to be, and listened to the town breathe. A wagon creaked. A door shut, and those footsteps stopped too. Silas smiled to himself just once, the way an older man does when he realizes the game has already started. If Rudd was watching, then someone above Rudd was watching too. And if that was true, the river shack was only safe until the next mistake. Silas did not plan to make one. Before he left Messia, Silas made one small stop he did not mention to anyone. He stepped into the telegraph office like he was only there to ask the time. Old Martinez behind the counter looked up, recognized him, and did not ask questions. Silas slid a folded note across the wood. Just a few words and one name. Elias Crow. If trouble turned real, that note would ride the wire faster than any horse. Someone was already sniffing around, and the wrong kind of help was often worse than none at all. That night, as the heat finally loosened its grip, Silas sat outside the shack with a cup of coffee gone thin and bitter. He looked at the stars the way a man does when he knows sleep will not come easy. Inside, Clara slept. Alive. For now. He could walk away. Plenty of men would. No one would blame him. But he had seen that mark on her skin. He had seen those numbers on that scrap of paper. Some roads, once stepped on, did not let you turn back. Morning came early and hard. The heat did not wait for the sun to clear the horizon. It was already there when Silas saddled his horse, thick in the air, pressing down on a man like a reminder that time did not slow for anyone. Clara was still asleep when he left the shack by the river. Her breathing was steadier now, but every breath still cost her something. Silas stood there a moment longer than necessary, listening, making sure the world had not already taken her while his back was turned. Then he rode for Las Cruces, not because he wanted to, because he had to. Supplies did not grow on cottonwoods, and answers never came to a man who stayed hidden too long. If Clara was right, and Silas believed she was, then someone had already noticed she was missing from wherever they expected her to die. Las Cruces looked the same as it always did. Dusty streets, sun-bleached buildings, men leaning where men always leaned. But Silas felt it right away, that sense that eyes followed him just a little too closely. He kept his pace easy, nodding where a nod was expected, acting like a man with nothing on his mind but feed and cloth. Inside, he counted steps and exits. At the store, he bought thread and clean bandage cloth. At the stable, he topped off his water and listened to a couple of men argue about cattle prices. Nobody said Clara's name. That did not mean they were not thinking it. When he stepped out back of the stable to check his horse, a shadow detached itself from the wall. The man was broad-shouldered and sunburned, with the look of someone who spent more time ordering others around than doing the work himself. His name was Cal Harker. Though Silas did not need an introduction. Every rancher for 2 days in any direction knew who Cal worked for. Cal smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. He talked easy, asked after Silas's ranch, mentioned the heat, made a joke about old men still riding fence. Silas answered with the same careful politeness he had learned over decades of dealing with men who smiled too much. Then Cal stepped closer. Too close. Voices rose. A shove followed. What happened next was not dramatic. No crowd, no shouting, just 2 men in the dust behind a stable, each trying to prove something the other. did not care about. Silas was not fast anymore. He knew that. What he still had was balance and patience. Cal swung hard and wild. Silas led him. When it was over, Cal lay in the dirt, breathing heavy, staring up at the sky like it had betrayed him. Silas straightened his hat and walked away without a word. That was the moment he knew. This was no longer about avoiding trouble. Trouble had already found him and put his name on a list. By the time Silas rode back toward the river, the sun was high, and the land shimmered like it always did in summer. He did not relax until the shack came back into view. Clara was awake when he returned. She tried to sit up, then thought better of it. "You were gone a while," she said. "Town was busy," he replied. She studied his face, reading the lines the way people do when they know something has changed. "They know," she said. Silas nodded. "They're guessing," she swallowed. Then she told him the rest, not the parts about fear. She was past that. She talked about the marks in the books that did not belong to cattle, about messages sent by wire that did not match the shipments they claimed to describe, about how one name kept appearing in places it should not. Vernon Pike's name, written like it belonged everywhere, and a lawman's name close enough to make her stomach turn. She did not say it out loud. She did not have to. Silas remembered Deputy Tom Rudd and the way his questions had lingered. Outside, the cicadas droned on like they always did, careless of human trouble. Silas sat back and rubbed his jaw. "There's a reason you're still alive," he said. She nodded slowly. "I think they wanted me scared," she said. "Wanted me to run, make mistakes. That fit. Men like that did not always kill right away. Sometimes fear did the job cheaper." Silas stood and looked out toward the open land, toward the direction of Fort Selden, toward Jada del Muerto. Beyond it, the dead man's journey. He had ridden parts of it before, enough to know why it had earned its name. "We leave before sunrise," he said. Clara did not argue that night. Neither of them slept much. Silas cleaned his rifle without hurry, checked his tack, set aside what little water he could spare. Clara lay still, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of a world that did not care if she lived or died. When the stars wheeled overhead and the river whispered on, Silas thought about the mark he had seen on her skin, the way it matched something from long ago that he had hoped never to see again. Some debts did not stay buried. As the first pale light touched the horizon, Silas tightened the cinch and glanced back at the shack one last time. He had a feeling the next road would not give them the choice to turn back, and somewhere ahead in the wide, empty stretch of Jada del Muerto, someone was already waiting for them. They left before the sun had a chance to burn the sky white. Silas led the horse at first, walking slow so Clara could steady herself in the saddle. The air was cool enough to feel kind, but both of them knew it would not last. Behind them, the river faded into quiet. Ahead of them stretched open land at the beginning of Jada del Muerto. The name was not poetry. It was a warning. Clara tried not to look at the empty distance too long out here. Space had a way of making a person feel small, and she was already tired of feeling that way. Silas kept his eyes moving. Tracks, broken brush, anything out of place. The first few hours passed without trouble, which made him uneasy. Silas hated quiet roads, but quiet roads made a man think he was safe. And thinking you are safe is how you get buried. He kept counting water, in his head not bottles, but mouthfuls. One for Clara, one for the horse, one for the hour that had not happened yet. Clara tried to hide how much the ride hurt her, but pain has a way of leaking out. Her fingers kept tightening on the saddle horn, then relaxing, then tightening again, like she was gripping the edge of a cliff. Silas did not tell her to be tough. He had never respected that kind of talk. Instead, he gave her something better, a job. He pointed toward the ground ahead and said, "Tell me what you see, not what you fear." It kept her mind working. It kept her upright. Then she saw it, a strip of cloth caught on a thorn bush, the same dirty color as the rag that had been tied to her leg. Silas stopped. He did not touch it. He just stared at it for a long moment, because that meant one of two things. Either someone had been out here before them or someone wanted them to think that nothing ever stayed calm for long when it mattered. Silas dismounted first, letting the horse graze on what little scrub grass could be found. Clara swung down, slowly wincing, but she held her balance. The cloth fluttered in the wind like a warning flag, and Silas bent to pick it up without touching it too much. He didn't want to leave fingerprints on something that already belonged to someone else's plan. "They're tracking us," he said quietly. Clara nodded. There was no point in lying to each other now. They were both too aware of the stakes, too aware of what could happen if someone got ahead of them. They moved again, careful, taking routes that kept them half hidden. The road widened, dust rising under hooves, the land opening up into the kind of emptiness that could swallow a man whole if he stopped paying attention. Silas counted each step, each shadow, each rustle. Clara followed his rhythm, breathing shallow, muscles stiff from pain and fear. Midday brought the heat like a hammer. They found a dry creek bed to rest and drink. Silas offered water first to Clara, then himself. Every sip was measured. Every glance was wary. They did not speak much. Words were expensive in a place where someone might be listening. But when she finally dared, Clara asked, "Do you think he's still alive?" Silas did not answer immediately. He looked at the horizon, the faint shimmer of heat dancing over Jada del Muerto. "I don't know," he said at last, "but someone's waiting. That's enough for now." By afternoon, the sun was relentless. Shadows shrank beneath them. Silas pushed the horse into a trot. He did not want to be caught in the open when the hunters arrived. Clara's legs ached, but she held on, her teeth clenched, mind racing. She remembered the faces she had seen, the quiet threats that had always hovered just out of reach, the men who thought they could scare her into mistakes. She would not give them that satisfaction. Night fell like a curtain. Stars blinked, cold and indifferent. They camped behind a low ridge, keeping fire small enough to warm, not enough to invite trouble. Silas kept watch, rifle ready, eyes sharp. Clara curled against the horse, exhausted beyond words, but the sharp edge of fear kept her awake. Somewhere in the dark, movement caught Silas's eye. He froze. Then the wind shifted, carrying a faint scent of smoke. He gestured for Clara to stay low. They both crouched behind the ridge. A figure passed, in the distance a man, moving too carefully, too purposefully. Silas counted, measured, waited. He knew this was the moment everything could go wrong. The man paused. Silas could see the glint of metal in his hand, not a rifle, not yet, but something that promised trouble. The wind carried the faint whisper of a name. Vernon Pike. Silas exhaled slowly. He had known this day would come. Every choice, every detour, every river crossing had led them here. The moment was raw and unyielding, like the land itself. He motioned Clara to move behind him. Together, they circled the ridge, keeping low, keeping quiet, keeping alive. Hours passed in tense shadows. Pike did not return immediately, but Silas knew it was only a matter of time. He planned their next move, silent, patient. Every second mattered. Every mistake could be the last one either of them made. Before dawn, Silas and Clara were back on horseback, moving fast but careful, slipping through trails that blended into the terrain. The first light painted the horizon in cold pinks and golds, and Silas thought about the journey that had begun in fear and desperation. He looked at Clara, her face pale but determined, and knew they would survive this night, because they had no choice but to. Somewhere ahead, beyond the cliffs and rivers, beyond the traps set by men who thought the West belonged to them, there was a chance for freedom, and they were riding toward it, every step measured, every breath counted, with courage forged in dust, heat, and the long shadow of the men who would not rest until they were caught or dead. The wind carried a warning, but also the taste of hope. Silas tightened his grip on the reins. Clara leaned forward, silent but resolute. The wide open land stretched endlessly, but together they had found a way through it. The West was unforgiving. So were the people in it, but they had each other, and that made all the difference. And so they rode into the horizon, into the unknown, but not unprepared. Because in a land like this, survival was measured not in the hours that passed, but in the courage to keep moving, no matter what shadows followed.